Hello and welcome to Deeper, a podcast where we have honest conversations with fascinating people who have lived unique lives and the companion piece to our YouTube series Deep. We want to give you a deeper window into the experiences and worlds of our amazing guests. So if you enjoyed today's interview, please consider subscribing. There will be a new video every week. My name is Marianne and I'm joined today by Ali. Ali, hi. It's really nice to have you here. Shall we start with you introducing yourself and just telling us briefly why you're here?
Yeah, so my name's Ali Millar. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book about it that was out with Penguin Random House. It was called The Last Days. And that was really about growing up as a Jehovah's Witness and then leaving the religion as well. So a lot of people leave when they're kind of in their teens. But I left when I was a lot older. So I was nearly 30 when I left, which kind of made the story quite a different story.
That sounds very, very interesting, and I have a lot of questions, so prepare yourself. Shall we start with the very beginning? I'm wondering if the best way to start is to explain who are Jehovah's Witnesses and kind of what they believe in. I mean, briefly, obviously, there's a lot to kind of put into it, but can you give us an overview?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jehovah's Witnesses are ostensibly a Christian religion. They believe that the end of days is coming imminently. So they preach to warn people about the end of time coming. They believe that God's real name is Jehovah, which is why they're called Jehovah's Witnesses. And they go out on their preaching work to try and convert other people. But they have a number of beliefs that kind of set them apart from mainstream Christianity, and a number of kind of rules and regulations that they call principles that they live by. So, for instance, not only do members go out and preach from door to door, they also stand next to the carts. They didn't have those carts when I was growing up as a witness, but one of the things that most people know about them is that they don't celebrate Christmas, they don't celebrate birthdays, they don't celebrate Easter. In fact, they celebrate very little. The only thing that they kind of have as a celebration is remembering Christ's death, which they call the memorial. They also don't accept blood transfusions, which leaves members open to dying. A lot of people have died from not accepting blood. Members also don't vote. They're encouraged to be no part of the world. And this kind of encouragement to be no part of the world means that quite often they're encouraged to have limited education. If you do go to university, it's often to study something that's kind of vocational. So it would be to do something that's going to guarantee you a job at the end of it. Kind of arts, humanities, philosophy, all of that is kind of frowned upon. It's a very hierarchical religion as well. And I don't think I'd really realized how hierarchical it was and how patriarchal it is as well until I left and I was writing about it. And one journalist who read the book said it was like a real life Handmaid's Tale. And it really was very like that. Women are very tightly controlled. Only within the last few months have they been allowed to wear trousers to the meetings. It had to be that you wore skirts, and those skirts were expected to be a certain length. Women don't lead in worship. Only men lead in worship. They're called the elders. And they have a very tight control over the congregation. They also have a very strong say in who remains a witness. So if you go against any of their rules, you can be what they call disfellowshipped. You can be kicked out of the religion. And although they say they don't shun, they encourage family members not to talk to anyone who's left unless it kind of falls under what they call business reasons. But for instance, I haven't seen my mother for 7 years, I think, maybe. So it's basically, you have this very closed world that they operate within. There's also a lot of culture that you're cut off from. So for instance, you aren't supposed to read anything or watch anything or listen to anything that has what they call immorality in. So if there's sex, if there's swearing, if there's any of that, you're not to kind of partake of it. Which means that when you leave, you're culturally really isolated as well as anything else. So that makes it really hard because you obviously, if you leave and you're cut off from your family and from your friends, you also don't understand the kind of system that you're entering. You don't understand the world that you're going into. So it makes that kind of adjustment after leaving very difficult. So it's a very closed system. They also encourage you to not have friends outside the religion. The outside of the religion is called the world, and they call anyone outside worldly. So you're not to have worldly associates because they might damage you. So again, that creates a very isolated system and a very closed world. Also, you're not encouraged to be friends with your colleagues or really to know other people at work. So again, it means that people inside the religion really only mix with people inside the religion. So the ideas that you encounter are very limited as well. So it can be very strange to leave. It's a really kind of odd period of readjustment.
I really want to talk to you more about the kind of the leaving and all of that, but just wanted to establish everything that chronologically that happened. So if we go back a little bit, can you tell me how and when did your family become involved with Jehovah's Witness? Have you always known it that way?
Yeah, so my mother converted, the rest of my family didn't. My mother was a single mum, and shortly after my father left, that's when she first encountered the witnesses. I was a baby at the time, and then she was baptized when I was about 2. So I really was all I knew growing up. I didn't remember. I think I had one Christmas. I don't think I ever had a birthday outside of the religion, so I didn't have kind of any clue how you celebrated birthdays or any idea how you celebrated Christmas. I wasn't allowed to go to friends' birthday parties. So it was like, really strange to kind of leave and readjust. My grandparents weren't witnesses, so that was kind of a little glimpse into another world, and that was actually really nice to have that. But my mother and my elder sister were witnesses, and it was all I knew.
Do you think, you kind of said that your mom at the point when she joined and kind of started being exposed to it, she was single mom, had a very small baby, and I'm assuming your elder sister also quite young. Do you think there was a certain vulnerability in her that Jehovah's Witness saw? How do they kind of recruit people?
Absolutely. I think she was very vulnerable. She said to me that when she was first contacted, she didn't necessarily believe it. She thought she was given a leaflet that was about paradise. That's another belief. They believe that after God has destroyed all the wicked people, i.e. everybody who isn't a witness, witnesses will live on the earth in a paradise earth. So they don't believe in heaven, they don't believe in hell. Well, they do believe in heaven, but only a select number go. So my mother saw this leaflet and she thought, well, I don't believe in paradise. That seems a bit far-fetched. But she was really scared that we would be destroyed. So she started to believe the kind of more fearful side of it. She believed in Armageddon, which is what they call when God will destroy everybody. And I think she was really vulnerable. I think she was also looking for a way of making sense of the world. And I think that these kind of groups can offer, in their kind of black and white thinking, they can offer that idea of right and wrong. And I think when you've been really hurt by somebody, it can be much easier just to kind of see the black and whiteness of the world rather than look at the grey areas. And it stopped her having to try and think that out. I don't think that members deliberately target vulnerable people, but I think when you read between the lines of how we were encouraged to target people, it's vulnerable people who usually become what's called return visits. So you go back to them in the ministry. We used to, when I was young, take a lot of people's data without ever asking for it. So we would have books, like little notebooks that you took on the ministry, and you would write down if somebody had children, if they were single, if they were this, if they were that. And then you would tailor make your presentation when you went back with magazines for them. So there's definitely that vulnerable people are drawn to it, but there is a definite encouragement to prey on the vulnerable. But it's disguised as doing something good. So it's very hard, even as a member, to kind of see through that. And I think that's what makes it very difficult, is that the whole thing is quite tricky to see through and to reason your way out.
I'm also wondering, it sounds, because you were talking about the belief system and it's like the Armageddon is coming, God is going to kill us all. Like, it's quite loaded for a kid. How did it feel like growing up with all of this narrative around you?
Really terrifying. So as a child, you're not really protected from the news. For instance, like I have children and I don't let them watch the news because they're children and the news can be really terrifying. But when I was young, it was that the news was kind of like cause for celebration. So anytime anything bad happened, it was oh, this must be it. This must be the beginning of the end. And they have various signs that they interpret as being the beginning of the end. So it would be earthquakes, war, famine, political unrest. Basically, the way the world was always meant that it was about to come. It was nearly there. So as a child, I was really, really terrified. There's one chapter in the book where it's a storm. I think it was in 1987. There was like a really severe hurricane and lots of trees were destroyed. And we had that kind of tail end of the storm in the UK and in the borders where I lived, and I was convinced that was it. And the storm went all night long, and I woke up and there was no power, and I was sure that I was going to look out my window and see all the neighbours dead. And I remember being really relieved because it happened in the nighttime, so I thought, well, at least everybody's inside. But I used to be told that I would have to like clear the dead from the streets, that would be one of my jobs. I used to also get told that my grandparents would die because they didn't believe in God, and that the rest of my mom's family would too. And I was terrified about having to see that and having to see their bodies too. So it was a really strange system to grow up within. It was also really difficult because I was meant to witness to people at school, but I didn't want to be the weird kid going in with the magazines, and I was supposed to give them to my teacher as well. But I didn't want to do it, but I felt a huge amount of guilt for not doing it as well. So I kind of grew up always feeling like I wasn't good enough because I wasn't quite doing what I was meant to do. But if I did do what I was meant to do, then I would be really odd and stand out too. So there was kind of quite a divide between kind of my true self and the other sense of self that I had very early on.
It's also quite interesting that though they tell you not to kind of communicate with the people outside of religion, you're still allowed to go to a regular school, for example, and still communicate with them. So it's kind of a thin line between don't communicate with them but still recruit them.
Mm-hmm. It's a very thin line, and it also makes you quite disingenuous because you're kind of told that you're not really friends with them. The only reason that you're kind of interacting with them is one, because you have to and you're at school, and two, to convert them as well. So it's quite sneaky the way it encourages you to be. A lot of witness children are now home educated. That started to be quite a big thing when I was kind of in my early teens. And I was fortunate in that my mum used to be a teacher before I was born, and then she went back to teaching when I was older. But she was quite against home education because she thought, and actually thought rightly, that a lot of the children weren't being very well educated. But I think it's quite concerning that children can be home educated when they're in a very strict religious system because they're not having any other outside input. I was really fortunate at school, I think, because every day you get this, again, it's a window into other worlds, other ways of being. And that really helped because I did have a good education, which I think was vital, really.
So you were growing up as a kid and kind of you talked about those things you believed and kind of terrifying things. How did it change? How did it progress? Or maybe it didn't change. How did it progress as you were growing up, becoming a teenager, maybe questioning things?
So I weirdly didn't question things. I think I kind of closed down my questioning mind very early on. And I think the literature, so the witnesses have their own literature as well, or they call it literature. I don't think it kind of constitutes literature, it's just printed stuff. But they had their own brochures, their own magazines, their own books. And it basically reiterates again and again and again the same message. So when you're exposed to that from as old as you can first read, as old as I can first remember, that programmed my brain in a certain way. So I didn't question it. I was actually really devout and really believed it. But at the same time, I didn't want to do it. So from maybe about the age of 10, I started to swear at school. I remember my sister telling my mum that she'd heard me swear on the school bus, and all hell broke loose. But I wanted friends. I wanted to be normal. So I started leading what the witnesses would call a double life. So I had friends at school. I would smoke with them. I would drink. I was into boys, all the usual stuff. I used to mislabel my cassette tapes. So I would it would be Nirvana, but it would say something vaguely holy on it so that I didn't get in trouble. So again, I thought it was great, but I was really split and I was really terrified because you're also taught that God's watching. So I was kind of sure that I was maybe able to fool everybody else, but I wasn't doing much to fool God. And that really terrified me. So I had a period of a few years where I was kind of going off the rails secretly. And also it's quite dangerous too, because, I didn't have any open dialogue with my mum, so I couldn't talk to her about maybe any situations I found myself in. So I would drink too much. I would end up in bad situations with boys. I was really vulnerable, essentially. And then when I was about 15, I got obsessed with the idea of being pure because I thought, right, this is just going to land me in trouble. So I developed an eating disorder. And I think that it was partly about control, but it was partly that it felt like somewhere to be safe. And it kept me really safe for a while as well. And it stopped me doing all the bad things or the things that I thought were bad. And it kind of kept me safe at home in bed as I became iller and iller.
I did want to ask if there was any kind of, as you were becoming a teenager, growing older, any kind of mental health effects of this early years where it's this, first of all, this terrifying kind of truth about the world, but also this double life that you've lived. So I guess the eating disorder is kind of
huge. I mean, even before the eating disorder. So I was a really anxious child, funnily enough. I used to have terrible nightmares. I had trouble sleeping, and the doctor advised that my mum played me story tapes to get me to sleep. And he obviously meant children's books, but she would play me the tapes from the Bible. And of course, it's full of horrible stories. So before I went to sleep, I would hear these awful stories, or we would listen to what's called My Book of Bible Stories, which is apparently a children's book, but it's again full of kind of Bible stories, and they're quite horrific. So I would listen to those before I went to sleep. I would have trouble getting to sleep. I would have really bad nightmares. And I had really sore tummies. And then when I was about 10, I developed migraines. So it was all these kind of psychosomatic things, but I think it was definitely because of what I was exposed to and what I was exposed to so young. And then I think I was about 11 when I was first diagnosed with clinical depression because I didn't have any friends. So I was understandably quite depressed. And then the eating disorder was kind of, I think, just a combination of so much stuff that, I really believe that trauma lives in the body and it has to find some way of getting itself out. And that was definitely, I think, the big thing.
So what was your way of dealing with that, once you developed the eating disorder and all of those mental health issues? How did you deal with it, especially inside the religion?
You're mainly encouraged to pray. So for a long time, I prayed and wondered what was wrong with me because I would pray and nothing would work. Witnesses are very skeptical of psychiatric intervention, and I'm not surprised because psychiatrists are quite good at identifying problems and helping people figure out where the problems lie. My grandmother was a doctor, and she really pushed for me to see a psychiatrist. And I was lucky in that I did get outside help. But I was very wary of treatment, and I was very wary of letting it work. So it took a long time. It really took until I left the witnesses, I think, for me to feel that I'm much more recovered than I would have been otherwise. I definitely used the eating disorder as a way of kind of hiding from my thoughts as well, because I was so obsessed with food and calories and exercise and everything else that I didn't have to think about whether I believed what I was doing or not. And it was definitely like a thought-stopping mechanism as well. And then I didn't need it when I left in the same way that I needed it when I was a witness.
How did it kind of move on later on in like later teen years and everything? I'm also wondering, I guess I kind of want to get on the marriage aspect here. And I guess I also wanted to ask you how marriage was generally seen in Jehovah's Witness. What were kind of rules around it?
Yeah, for me, it didn't even feel like a choice of getting married or not. You just got married. If you didn't get married, for most women that didn't get married, it was that they chose to pioneer, which meant doing, I think at the time it was either 80 or 90 hours a month on the ministry, which meant you would have a part-time job, usually being a secretary or a cleaner. It didn't feel like, I never had thoughts when I was growing up, will I get married or not? It was just, I will get married because everyone around me was married. Also, you couldn't have sex if you didn't get married. So you're going to get married, and people get married young. I was ill for so long that it took up, like between 16 and 19, I was pretty much just very ill. And then I left home when I was 19, and I met a witness he was in his mid-20s at the time. And we got married when I was 21. But it never, the thought of being single and having a career and thinking what I wanted myself from life never occurred to me.
What is the marriage situation like if in Jehovah's Witness? Is it seen as a private affair, or is it still controlled? I imagine it is.
So the husband is head of the family, which is something that you're told from very early on. You're told that the marriage arrangement, as they like to call it, mirrors the congregation. So the man is the head. And the woman is called the weaker vessel, which you're also told is something really nice, because that means that you're being looked after and you're being considered, despite the fact you're basically being told how weak you are. And you're encouraged not to be questioning and not to rock the boat, basically. It's also not a private affair. So you get married in a kingdom hall and an elder marries you, and it's very much that if there's any problems, the elders are involved from the beginning, essentially. But the elders are involved, like your whole life isn't private. I remember when I was little, my mum would ask because she didn't have a husband to tell her what to do, she would ask the elders up, and they would kind of get involved in pointing out how we should be behaving or what we should be doing. So nothing's ever really very private. They have a real kind of, I don't know what the word would be, like almost like a kind of tentacle, like reach into every family's business and every family's affairs, but all the more so when you're married.
And what was your marriage like?
It was not great. My husband was 5 years older than me, which was a fact that I was never allowed to forget. He was also obviously much more intelligent than me. He was much better educated than me. He had a better job than me. Again, these are all things that I wasn't ever able to forget. A difficult marriage, but again, I didn't realize it was a difficult marriage because it was very like all the marriages around me. And I still thought there was something wrong with me. So whenever I doubted anything within the witnesses, I thought, well, I'm only doubting this because there's something wrong with me. So I thought, well, I'm not good enough at being a wife. And I mean, I was 21. Like, what 21-year-old really knows what being a wife means? So yeah, it was always, oh, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. I was at university at the time, which had been frowned on anyway, that I went to university, and my studies were very much expected to kind of take a back seat. I was expected to keep the house immaculate. I had to have people up for dinner. I had to entertain. I had to be on the ministry. I was basically busy all the time, and then would like study in the evenings, the rare evenings that you have. Most of the evenings are kind of taken up with ministry and meetings. But yeah, my kind of uni studies, I was very much encouraged to sideline. And also I wasn't allowed to see anybody from university either.
Are you expected to have a child kind of early on, straight away, or anything like that? Or is that not part of the deal?
It's not really part of the deal. There's actually a lot of witnesses who don't have children because they say the world is so bad, will defer having children until the new system, which I think is quite heartbreaking. So you have a lot of people who defer, well, they kind of defer their whole life. They talk about, in the new system, I will be, and they'll kind of list the profession that they would like to have now. It's like they've basically put their whole life on hold, waiting for God to come. And so a lot of people are childless. But I had a child. I was 24 when I became pregnant with my first child, and 25 when she was born.
And how did having a child, did it change kind of the way you saw the witnesses, and all of that, or did it not?
Yeah, having her was really the beginning of the end in a way. So she was a few days old when I was given a copy of a Bible storybook for her. And the person who gave it to me was so excited to give it to me. And I remember looking at it and thinking, I can't read this to the child. I cannot read this to her, because I knew that in it being read to me, I'd had so many nightmares and all these psychosomatic effects. I thought, I can't do it. But again, I thought there was something wrong with me, and I became very anxious. I had a lot of postnatal anxiety. But also I felt like being a mum was the first thing that I was actually quite good at. And so the first time in my life, I kind of had this feeling of being competent at something. And she kind of gave me a confidence that I hadn't had before as well. And I started, I think, to begin to be able to think. And I hadn't been very good at thinking before that. So something definitely kicked in when she was born.
And did that influence your decision to leave eventually?
Definitely.
So how did that happen?
So what happened was I met somebody else. I met someone, and I had what the witnesses would call an affair. It wasn't much of an affair. Actually, in retrospect, was like, I should have done that a bit better. And then the elders came up to our house to talk to me. My husband asked the elders to come up, and they had what's called a judicial committee, which I didn't know they were coming for, but basically they like laid 3 chairs out in a row in front of me, and it was a new house that had like windows out onto the street, and we only just moved, so we didn't have any curtains or anything, so people were walking past, and they had the big electric light on as they were doing this as well. And they asked me really intimate questions about my marriage, about intimate questions about the other relationship, questions that I never thought I had the choice to not answer either. So I told them everything that they asked me. I saw them as kind of being men of God. And I didn't realize at the time that kind of what they were doing was actual torture techniques. My husband, who I had a difficult enough relationship with, was sitting on the sofa with me. And when I suggested that maybe he could leave the room, they said, no, he's your husband. He has to be allowed to stay. So it was really, really horrible. But again, I kind of submitted to it and didn't think that I had the choice to kick them out, basically, which I would do now quite happily. But that at the time, and they were there for hours. They were there till it was nearly midnight. And they sent me out the room before they came to their decision. And they basically said, oh, we've let you stay a witness, but with these caveats, I wasn't allowed to answer at the meetings anymore. I can't even remember if I wasn't allowed to go on the ministry. I think I was, but I kind of had to be like heavily guarded on the ministry. I had to study with an elder's wife. I basically had to just like be really humiliated. And they also they said when they came into the room, everything that happens in this room is private and between us. And then that Sunday, they had a talk at the meeting, what's called a public talk, and there was over 100 people there, where they basically told the whole congregation what had been going on. And they didn't name me, but it's a small community. Everybody knew who they were talking about. And at that time, I thought, oh, there's something wrong with me because I'm not humble enough to accept their loving discipline, as they called it. But over time, I just, and also, so my husband and I split up then. So I had a lot of time on my own and stopped going to the meetings as much. And with that time, I started to kind of write it down. And I'd always been scared to write things down, because kind of when you write the truth you write something, often the truth comes out. And as I wrote, I started to kind of figure out that maybe they weren't that great after all. Maybe they'd actually interfered with my marriage. They just interfered with my whole life. And then I went to a meeting in which the circuit overseer, so he's kind of like in charge of lots of congregations, and he got up and he actually misquoted the Bible while looking at me. And I knew my Bible. I'd been like really diligent at making sure I knew my Bible, and I knew he was misquoting this. And he said, God can never forgive anyone who's divorced. And I knew that that wasn't even a witness teaching. And I thought, no. And so I just packed all my stuff up and left. And as I was leaving, I knew that that was it. I was completely done and I was never going back.
But that sounds, first of all, I want to say loving discipline is a beautifully toxic term. But that sounds like, with everything you've said before, that kind of, I've just packed up my stuff and left. That sounds like a huge, huge thing, because it's cutting yourself off everything and the world as you've known it, right? I
didn't really think it through, which I think was probably for the best, because I just literally thought, I'm not having someone who is in a position of authority misquote the key text that we're all supposed to live by at me. And you're right, it's so toxic. Around about that same time, I'd been in the pub and I'd seen like they had like a domestic violence campaign on the back of the toilet doors. And it was like, are you in a relationship where he controls your money, he controls who you see, he does this, he does that? And I sat looking at this poster and thought, yeah, that's my whole life. That's what the organisation are doing to me. And basically the upshot of the poster was, if you're in that kind of relationship, then leave. And I think once you see your way through something, you can't go back into it. It was as if it was like a reverse conversion, like they would talk about Paul on the road to Damascus and how he converted to Christianity. And it was almost like exactly the same thing happened, that the kind of scales fell from my eyes and I could see the organisation for what it was. And there was no way that I could go back. But fortunately, I didn't think it through and I didn't know what was coming. So I didn't really realise how isolated I was about to make myself. I went home that day and I had all like my kind of Christian clothes and my meeting books and everything. I put it all into bin bags and took it out in the streets in Edinburgh. There's like big communal bins, and I just put it all in a big communal bin because I knew I wasn't going to need it again.
And so what was life like outside of the organization?
Well, I suddenly found myself with all this time. So I used to go to meetings on a Sunday, on a Thursday night, on a Tuesday evening, and then you would prepare for the meetings and do study in between times. And then you would have the ministry, and then you would have entertaining your friends and Christian association, it was called. Suddenly there was none of that. And I didn't have a clue what to do with free time. I'd always been like programmed to fill my time full and to be busy. And suddenly it was just all gone. I also didn't have a clue who I was. I didn't know what I liked. All of my identity was built around my belief system. I didn't even really know what I liked to eat. So I used the time after I left, and it was horrible. I was brutally lonely. I was really lonely. I didn't know anybody. I remember walking around the city and thinking, like, I may as well live in the countryside. I may as well live somewhere really remote and isolated for all that I know people. I didn't have childhood friends. I didn't have uni friends. I didn't have anything really. But I used the time. I began to basically kind of binge on culture. I think I realized that culture was going to be my way into getting to know people, because that's basically the language we all speak. So I would just go and see anything at the cinema. I didn't care. I'd gone from sitting in the cinema terrified that there would be a sex scene and I would have to walk out because that's what you're meant to do, which is so embarrassing. I'd gone from that to I'll just go and watch whatever. I'll just take a punt. And I would just go to the art house cinema with a cup of coffee and just watch kind of whatever came on. And it was amazing. Suddenly able to watch whatever I wanted on TV. I would go to the secondhand bookshop. And whereas in the past I was worried about buying things secondhand because I was warned that there might be demons in them, and demons would get into the house and then would, I don't know, do demonic things to me. I could suddenly buy secondhand books and I could read whatever books I wanted. I spent the time, I wrote a terrible manuscript of a novel that first year. I basically just spent the time kind of devouring art and culture and finding out what I liked. I also started working in music. So, because we'd been warned as witnesses, you're warned that basically anyone artistic, anyone in the cultural industries, they're the worst. They're the really, really bad people. And I thought that sounds like quite a lot of fun. So I'll go and find out. So I met a lot of local musicians and local promoters and local people who weren't at all what I'd been warned they would be, but instead there were people who were really passionate about trying to create a community and essentially kind of trying to create the sort of life that I'd been taught to wait for, of waiting for the new system, waiting for being able to have hobbies, waiting for being able to enjoy yourself. And suddenly here was a group of committed, passionate people just building a good life for themselves, and people who were friends with each other. So my friendships until that point had always been conditional. I was always waiting to be told what I'd done wrong. And people did tell you all the time. I used to get cancelled a lot. If I wore a skirt that was above my knee, an elder's wife would have a word with you. Everyone always wanted to have words with you and set you straight, basically. I was always worried about the friendships ending as well. And then, of course, all my friendships did end. And the worst thing had happened to me. And then I met other people who I could be friends with and they liked me for who I was, not for what I believed as well. And that took quite a long time to get used to. It also took a long time to get used to that in a friendship, you don't need to have the same opinion as someone, and you don't need to have the same hobbies, and you don't need to believe the same things. So learning that there was room for difference was definitely amazing. It genuinely felt like I was born after I left the religion. And I kind of always think that life really began when I hit 30, and it was very difficult to begin with, and it was really hard. Not knowing anyone, the worst part obviously was losing my mother, and that's still really, really difficult. But other than that, it's just been a joy to have left. It's genuinely amazing to be able to have a life that I think, well, this is my life and this is the life I chose, and it's the one that I've built for myself.
That's very empowering. But you kind of touched on it, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about your mother. So I'm assuming that as part of what religion tells you, she can't be in contact with you. Is that correct?
Yeah. So they don't call it shunning. in the religion. It's called disfellowshipping, but of course it is shunning. I think it's a way of them avoiding taking responsibility for what they encourage followers to do. My mum would describe it as her own choice, but she wouldn't see that that choice is influenced by videos that they put out, by magazines that they have, by their literature, and by the elders as well. She would also say that I've caused it to happen because I knew it was going to happen if I left, but I don't think you can live a lie and be an authentic person, so I couldn't stay a witness just so I could see my mum. And recently they kind of changed their rules a little bit, that they're allowed to talk to you if they're going to encourage you to return. But I wrote a book about the organisation, and I've been very publicly outspoken about leaving and about how I believe them to be a pretty nefarious organisation. So my mother hasn't been in contact with me because she'll know that there's no hope of bringing me back in.
And how long has it been?
Last time I saw my mother was when my youngest was a baby, and that was at a family party. But I've not seen her I've not had a proper conversation with my mother since I was 32. So yeah, it's been a long time.
And again, you don't have to answer that question if that's private, but what about your ex-husband? Because you obviously share a child. Are you in contact with him? Is he in contact with her?
She sees him, yeah, but I don't have any contact with him other than the kind of data, other than arranging the logistics of things. But no, I've not had any contact with him.
With everything you've kind of described of the way Jehovah's Witnesses work, it's obviously it is a religious organization, but do you think it's safe to say it's a cult or not?
I think it's absolutely safe to say it's a cult. They use all the tactics that cults use. So I think if the descriptor for cult models fits them, which it does, so they control your behavior, they control information, they control access to people outside, they really control all areas of the followers' lives. So, if the cap fits, then it fits.
So in many countries it's banned, in quite a few countries around the world. But in the UK, Jehovah's Witnesses are registered as a charity. Is that right? What is your kind of take on that? What do you think about it?
I think about it a lot, sadly. I think that on the one hand, it's quite good that there's a regulatory body that's kind of apparently there to control them and make sure that they're not totally awful. They would still exist without being registered as a charity, I think, because when witnesses are banned, quite often they can use that as evidence that they're being persecuted. So it kind of plays into the persecution complex that they have anyway, so it doesn't necessarily do them that much harm. It's also part of what they say is going to happen towards the end. So again, it plays into the fulfillment, like the kind of prophecy of the end times. But I think if the definition of a charity is that it does some kind of public benefit, which is what you have to prove to operate as a charity, then it's very hard to argue that they are actually charitable in the effect that they have and in the aims that they have. I think their money situation is incredibly complex and possibly should have quite a lot more research done into it. Obviously, charities are tax exempt, and they have, I think it's 5 registered charities within the UK that they can actually just donate money between. So their money trail is really hard to properly get a grip of. I know that the Charity Commission have been looking into them since 2016, I think, and partly that investigation has taken so long because they've refused to comply with requests for information. They had to go to the High Court, and again, they refused to comply with that. So the leaders are very protective of the money. They're also very protective of their public face and their public identity as well, which is definitely a carefully crafted one. I think that more than anything, they operate They do, obviously, they are registered as a charity and they call themselves a religion, but I would definitely say that they're a business organisation masquerading as a religion.
And there has been quite a lot of allegations of the misconduct inside religion. A lot of, I mean, different ones, but some of them are about the sexual assaults and everything happening. Have you ever kind of heard, witnessed anything like that? And kind of, how do you think they also get away with it?
So they get away with it because it's such a closed system. Everything's kept in-house. It's also, there's a huge mistrust of authorities. So it used to be if someone was alleged to be sexually abusive, it was that you would go to the elders. You weren't encouraged to go to the police. Families, yes, were told that they could go to the police, but not told that they had to go to the police. And the elders would deal with that and decide if the person was repentant or not. There was a lot of victim blaming as well. So children were made to feel bad about what had happened, and also a huge lack of safeguarding. But again, it plays into the public face that the witnesses have versus the private one. So they would say in public, well, we're not like other religions. We don't have a Sunday school, so elders aren't alone with children. But equally, an elder could be on the ministry with the child, and so they are alone with children. Or they could be in what was called the second school, which was like a small back room. They could be there with a child. There were no safeguarding policies publicly displayed. It was almost like we didn't actually really know that they were a charity. You know, there's so much that's concealed from the followers, and the scale of abuse within the organisation is massive. After I published The Last Days, which doesn't have any child abuse in it because it didn't happen to me, so many people told me their own personal experiences, and I was shocked that it was child abuse that kept cropping up time and time and time again, and the elaborate cover-ups that they would go to as well, the lengths they would go to conceal the scale of the problem. I remember growing up and we would be told from the platform how awful the Catholic Church was. And of course, the Catholic Church has a huge problem. But that was always held up as, you know, this is what happens in other religions, and we're this loving religion, where all the children were encouraged to call the other members aunt and uncle, where we were encouraged to go on the ministry with people who we barely knew. We were constantly, as children, putting ourselves in really, really vulnerable situations. You were told that the elders were people who had to be listened to at all times. And of course, that creates a terrible power dynamic between an adult and a child as well. So I'm not surprised that they have a huge problem within the organisation.
I'm also wondering, some of the things you've kind of said, and especially in the beginning, about like how they, for example, about your grandparents, when you said at some point you were terrified that your grandparents are going to die because they're non-believers, if that's the way to put it. It feels a little bit like radicalization techniques. So how do you think they get away with it in the UK, which, if you look at it, it kind of feels radicalization. Do you think, and I'm trying to put it in the most polite possible way, but do you think because it's still seen as a Christianity, radicalization there is not seen as so kind of horrible?
I think that Christianity as a whole gets away with things that other religions don't. We don't see Christianity as being a violent religion. It's seen as a kind of softer religion. I completely agree with you. I was totally radicalized as a child. I was taught to believe that it was a good thing that God was going to destroy everybody. I was meant to believe that billions of people dying was something that I should rejoice over. So how is that not radicalization? I was taught to be homophobic. I was pretty much taught to be xenophobic as well. Anyone outside the religion was not welcome. So therefore, I was basically against anyone outside. So it's absolutely horrible. But I do think that Christianity, you kind of get away with a lot because you're not being radicalized necessarily to be violent, but you are also being told. The more that I looked at the literature, the more I saw sinister things as well, that witnesses would be told that if in the future they had to do something that maybe didn't make common sense to them, they were to do it anyway because that was from God. So you've got the leaders basically putting themselves in a situation where they can tell followers to do whatever they want to tell them to do. And that's always really concerned me since I left. And I realised that kind of the radicalisation techniques that were being used and were used on me, I had to deprogram myself essentially. People have to when they leave. That those techniques are being used on nearly 9 million people.
9 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're big.
Let's kind of move on to something a little bit more positive. So you are now an author. You're out of all of it. You have a family. I wonder, do you ever tell your children about your upbringing? Do you tell them what they've been through? I mean, and one of your daughters was born in religion, essentially. How do you frame that conversation with them?
I kind of try and keep it age appropriate for them. I don't want them to have a bad opinion of religion. I want them to form their own conclusions because I wasn't allowed to. So we have I would never say to them, God isn't real, for instance. I keep it very open. At home, I ask them, what do they think about God? How do they feel about God? Obviously, they're at school and they get told all different things and they're trying to reason it out and work it out. And I actually love seeing them try and form their own ideas about belief as well. It's really quite sweet. But I will tell them what happened in the past. So I'll tell them that I wasn't allowed birthdays or I wasn't allowed Christmas. I am awful at birthdays and Christmas. Their dad always laughs at me because I don't have a clue when to stop buying presents and I don't know how to have a contained Christmas or a contained birthday. It's only been in the last couple of years that I haven't gone completely overboard. In fact, they used to hear the phrase, Mommy's gone overboard, so many times that my youngest thought that I'd fallen off the Uber boat because she'd been told that Mommy's gone overboard. She told the teacher that I'd fallen off the boat at Christmas. I was like, no, sweetheart. But I will tell them age-appropriate stuff. And it was quite funny recently because I was telling my 10-year-old the things that I wasn't allowed to do. And he just stopped and he looked at me and he said, Mommy, did you have any friends at school? And I was like, well, not many. But yeah, I think they understand it a bit. I obviously don't want them to ever fully understand it or inhabit it because then that would mean that they'd kind of taken too much of it on, I think. And I quite like them, knowing me as I am now. I don't want them to feel sorry for me or to see me as some kind of victim. I've told them that they're not allowed to read the book yet. There's an age limit, but there's an age limit across my work. So basically they're not allowed to read Mummy's work till they're bigger. But they are quite interested in it.
Are you still religious?
I am not religious at all. I think when I've seen the harm done by religion over centuries and centuries and the global harm done by it, I find it very hard to be religious in any form. I find belief fascinating. I find the idea of believing in something kind of so difficult to myself as a person that I find it quite beautiful when people do believe in things. I think I'm quite questioning, and I would describe myself as agnostic more than anything else because I think, well, I can't prove God, but likewise, I haven't been able to disprove God either. So I'm kind of in the middle when it comes to what I believe in.
What would you think your reaction would be if one of your children, they grow up and they'll come to you and they'll be like, not necessarily I'm going to join Jehovah's Witness, but I want to go to a church. I don't know, I'm interested in that. Would you be open to it? I
would want to think that I was, because I think with kids, the more you kind of gasp and disprove of something, the more tightly they'll hold to it. I know that that was definitely the case with my grandparents. I think that some of my mum's adherence to the religion early on was definitely a kind of a rebellion that she was going through as well. She wanted to wind them up. and it worked. So I think I would try and keep it to myself. If they're going to church, I'm fine with a normal church. Is there a normal church? Yeah. If they're kind of seeking something, I think, well, we all seek things and we all need to have something that we can kind of get a sense of community from. I'd really struggle if they went anywhere near anything that I would define as a cult. I'd find that really, really hard.
Kind of looking back at everything you've been through, do you regret any of that? Do you think it formed who you are now? What's your reflection on it?
I think there's no point regretting it. I think if I regretted any of it, then it would just sort of sow the seeds for me feeling bitter or feeling resentful. And who's to say? I have no idea what parts of my childhood were the really formative parts that let me live as who I am now. So if I got rid of any of it, maybe the outcome now wouldn't be the same. And I really like my life now. So no, I don't regret any of it. And not just because it's like, well, I had something to write a book about. There's loads of things you can write books about. I'm sure I might have found something, or I would be doing something completely different. But I think it's a really dangerous game to play off, well, if X hadn't happened, then Y wouldn't have. And there's no point to it, because otherwise I would just be wasting my time.
And I was wondering, kind of one of my last questions, I want to ask you, what advice would you give someone who is either have someone inside Jehovah's Witness and they would like to reach out to them and kind of talk to them and use the right words, and also an advice to someone who is maybe watching it, who's inside and considering leaving? Though I don't know if you would be able to access information like this if you're considering to leave and you're still inside. But how would you talk to someone basically in it who maybe has some sort of doubt?
I think I would tell them not to be afraid. Don't be afraid of people who've left. That's one of the biggest things that you're warned against, is people who've left are bitter apostates, they get called, or mentally diseased as well. Don't be afraid. Everyone who's left has unpicked the belief system. They're not people who've lost their faith. They're people who have carefully examined their faith and found it wanting and had to build a life outside. I would genuinely say, don't be afraid of researching. Don't be afraid of finding out what the organization's really like and what it really does. Go away and find out as much as you can, and then just go and live. Just go and throw yourselves into things. People are good. People outside are good people. I've found some incredible people who I spend my time with and share my life with. I feel incredibly lucky. I feel hugely fortunate. And life is waiting. It is absolutely out there. Just go and grasp it, basically.
And if there is a chance that your mom would watch this, what would you say to her?
Oof, that's a tricky one. I don't think I'd know what to say. I was asked in a Q&A shortly after the book came out if I would want my mum to leave, if I wanted her to kind of wake up and leave. And now my mum is in her 70s now. And my answer was absolutely not. I don't want her to feel that she's wasted her life. I think that her belief gives her something. I would rather that she had that and doesn't have the kind of the pain of deprogramming herself and realizing that there might be lost time, that she hasn't seen her grandchildren grow up, all of this. So my answer was no, I wouldn't want her to leave. And I felt quite staunch, and I felt quite like I was right in that answer. And then in the signing queue, I looked up and there was this very old lady, and she held out my book for me to sign. And she said to me, I'm 95 and I don't agree at all. She'd left 2 years ago, and she said she'd had the best 2 years. And again, she didn't have regrets that she hadn't left sooner, but all she loved and was thankful for was that she'd had those 2 years. So she completely threw my kind of sense of certainty into disarray. So I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what I would say to my mum, but I would love to sit and have coffee and scones with her, basically.
Do you think you've forgiven her for what happened between you?
Absolutely. I think forgiveness is a difficult construct. I think you need to feel that you've done something wrong to be able to forgive a person. And my mother won't think that she's done something wrong. So whether or not I can forgive her, on the kind of like the sort of moral argument of what forgiveness is. But I certainly feel that I understand her because I shunned people. I shunned my friends. If my mum had left and I still believed, I'd be shunning her too. And I feel that the process of writing the book massively helped me understand why she became a witness, what she gets out of it, how it fulfills needs for her. Also helped me understand how they reprogram people and how people's brains are essentially changed as well. So I definitely understand her.
I guess that's maybe part of forgiveness, understanding something.
I think so. I definitely don't feel any kind of resentment towards her. I'm even less sad about it now than I was. I used to be really, really sad a lot of the time. I think maybe it's a resignation as well. I've accepted it. And I think you have to come to a stage where you accept things in life so that you can continue to kind of live and grow and move on as well.